Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fallen London. Today we're going to be having a look at March's exceptional story, The Memories of Mozart. As always, at the start of a new exceptional story, spoilers ahead, play these for yourself, support Failbetter, become an exceptional friend, and let me know if anything different happens to you. But without further ado, let's jump in. The clanging of a ship's bell jolts you awake, and you are dismayed to find yourself at Z. Not necessarily an exceptional circumstance in itself, of course, but you'd prefer to remember how you got here. Surveying your surroundings, you determine yourself to be sitting in a cargo hold. Above you, the stomping of heavy boots. Do the sailors even know you're down here? You peer out of a porthole, hoping for landmarks, but the Z is dark and endless, an inverted night sky. Well, let's rack our brains. What's the last thing you remember? You try to remember. A shriveled human heart lying atop a bed of broken glass. The suffocating smell of formaldehyde. And that's all. Try as you might, you remember nothing more. Just darkness, followed by awakening aboard this ship. The lights of Hunter's Keep, the bustle of Wolfstack. You are near a home. Emerging on deck, you find the ship almost entirely crewed by efficient but taciturn clay men. They have no words to answer your questions. At most, they can muster an expressive shrug. The only other humans aboard are a whiskey-steeped captain and a female passenger in a black veil. If there are answers to be found, you know where to start. Interrogate the whiskey-steeped captain. He squints up at you from the bottom of a bottle. His eyes focus on you only with great effort. The captain offers some muttered apologies. He says you came aboard with the other passenger, booking passage to Polythreme. Perhaps you should speak to her? Polythreme? That's where you're headed? Uh-oh. I've been sailing the route twixt Polythreme and London for years, says the captain, offering you a pull from his flask. Want some? If you get good and drunk a few days before landfall, it helps with the screaming. Interrogate our fellow passenger. She seems surprised by your line of questioning, though it's difficult to ascertain her emotions beneath the veil. How baffling, she says. I'd heard that strange things happen at Z, of course, but still, you're here because you offered to join us on a bold and possibly ill-fated adventure. Does that sound like the sort of thing you'd do? You are forced to admit you've been known to indulge in the occasional pursuit of that nature. Usually you're plunged into them a little less abruptly, though. When, exactly, did this venture begin? It's been over a week, he says with a titter. Do you really not recall? I suppose one shall have to introduce oneself all over again. It was you who first approached us, he says. After I bought a certain object at auction, when I explained what I was up to, you volunteered your aid. No, she'll have to do better than that. What object? What auction? Can she stop talking in riddles? Let us start at the beginning, the veiled lady says. Since I was a child, I have adored listening to wonderful pieces of the greats, Beethoven, Bach, Schubert. Apparently not. So we can either express our own appreciation for the greats. The melomaniac can wax rhapsodic on the subject for hours. You find yourself below deck, sharing a bottle of wine as she sings Die Forel. We can insist, gets to the point. Last you knew, You were returning to your lodgings after an evening out, and now you're at Z. What is going on? Let's express our own appreciation for the greats. After a long discussion on the merits of Bach's chromatic works, the conversation finally returns to your purpose aboard this vessel. The greatest genius of all, of course, was Wolfgang Amadeus. He stutters slightly on the final word. But alas, poor Wolfgang died tragically young. Every day I think about the wondrous works he could have created with additional years. Taking another sip. It's a particularly fine vintage. You wait patiently for her to reach her point. She reaches into her handbag and removes the yellowed skull, holding it with the reverence one would normally reserve for a holy relic or a life-saving antidote. "This is what I bought at auction," he whispers. "The skull of Wolfgang Amadeus, his very own self. If only he... if only..." Dissolving into floods of tears, the melomaniac proves inconsolable. She can withstand few further questions. So why have we booked passage to Polythreme? The skull of Mozart looks up at you accusingly. It lacks a lower jaw, which lends to a somewhat gormless aspect. You can't say Mozart's skull is gormless. "In the restless city, I've heard all things are granted life," says the melomaniac. "The coins, the clothes, the very stones beneath one's feet. Why not a skull? Would the city's endless vitality bring dear Wolfgang back to life so he can create yet further wonders?" Her expression is lost behind the veil, but her voice quivers with longing. "I wear this veil in grief for a genius I never knew. When one saw his skull at auction, one's path was clear." The mystery of your presence here prods at your mind. You will get to the bottom of this, but for now, you can only await your journey's end. The taciturn crew go about their labour. The captain drinks alone. The melomaniac stands statue still at the prow, humming haunting melodies. And we have 3 days to get to Polythreme. Ooh, there's quite a lot of options here. Ooh, we can draw on our experience as a midnighter. Again, my profession gives me an option. I'm going to do that first. Periods of memory loss are your bread and butter. What has experience taught you? Or at least, what can you recall? It's hardly the first time you've woken up somewhere new. You'd almost suspect this whole affair was part of some move in the great game. But it doesn't fit the pattern. This is either an unprecedented upending of the rules, or a gambit from a different game altogether. You think back to your final memories before waking at Z, returning to your lodgings, the heart atop broken glass, formaldehyde, then darkness. No, not darkness. Darkness with a subtle hint of a familiar, yet unfamiliar colour. Irigo. A bag with an irigo silk interior, perhaps, thrust suddenly over your head from behind. Such things are not unheard of. A most efficient kidnapping. But the question remains, why? 2 more days, so we can do 2 more of these options. The melomaniac doesn't seem all that useful. She hasn't given us much information anyway. So let's do something a little bit more chancy. Let's observe the melomaniac for signs of deception, made more difficult by her veil. But perhaps you can catch her in a contradiction. You befriend the melomaniac. You engage her in harmless conversation. Now and then, with apparent nonchalance, you jab her with a question, as incisive as a scalpel. Each time, she answers effortlessly. Perhaps she's lying about your missing week, but if so, she lies with such blithe grace that she's among the finest liars you've ever known. You do, however, notice something else. Every single word she says utterly avoids the use of the letter M. You wouldn't have noticed, if not for her inability to say Amadeus without stuttering. Other than that, she never speaks the letter of the alphabet. Let's break into the captain's cabin. There must be more to this ship than meets the eye. In the Neath, something appearing on the surface mundane is enough reason for suspicion in itself. The lock springs open at your fingertips in a matter of moments. You rummage through the cabin, ignoring the captain's rumbling snores. Alas, find nothing out of the ordinary. You come across a ledger that seems to prove the captain's words. The ship has run back and forth between Polythreme and London for years, trading in silks and coffee. Over time, the human sailors resigned and were replaced by clay men who could better endure their homeland's ceaseless screaming. Recently, you notice the captain has been shipping a lot of clothes colonies from Polythreme to London. The buyer is anonymous. Curious. Sentient clothes are generally considered a nuisance, rather than a desirable good. Yes, anyone who played the Paisley exceptional story, which is in one of the playlists. No, it's in the playlist. I can't remember what year it was. Fantastic exceptional story. Polythreme spreads before you, in all its throbbing torment. Out here, the screaming worms its way past even the most effective earplugs. And it's made worse when the earplugs start screaming too. Polythreme, a city that never shuts up, declares the whiskey-steeped captain, taking one final swig before falling flat on his back. The ship glides into port. The claymen busy themselves unloading their cargo, while the melancholy melomaniac shimmies daintily down the gangplank. Mozart's jawless skull tucked under one arm. Well, I guess we have to follow her. She pauses to check the contents of the crates being loaded onto the ship, then seats herself upon a bench that begs for death. I plan to journey into the city's heart, where the shrieking is loudest and the vitality is at its apex, says the melomaniac. Dear Wolfgang should awaken after a few days in the interior. You are, of course, invited to join us, but I understand if you prefer to wait at the docks. The melomaniac waits politely for your answer. Mozart's skull sits on her lap. Should you accompany her to Polythreme's heart? Or wait for her here, so I can either remain at the docks while objecting to her entire plan. You doubt the actual mind of Mozart can be so easily summoned back to life, even if that is his skull. Surely someone would have tried this already. We can remain at the docks. Apparently the screaming of Polythreme's centre is even louder than this. The very thought chills the soul. Or we can accompany her on her expedition. Why else did you come all this way? I'm afraid I suffer from this terrible condition of just utter curiosity. We're going to go with her. The maze-like streets of Polythreme unwind beneath your feet. Any conversation with the melomaniac quickly proves impossible, as the city's cacophony escalates to an intolerable level. A day passes. Meals are a complex affair. The cutlery turns on you. The food pleads and squirms. The sleep is worse, of course. Finally, you arrive at the great palace of the King with 100 Hearts, and you set up camp in its shadow. The palace crumbles and coughs like a sleeping dragon. On the third day, the skull awakens. The skull screams. It adds its mindless shriek to the surrounding cacophony. The melomaniac stands like a statue, cradling the relic to her bosom as it fills the air with pointless noise. If this is the spirit of Mozart, it's clearly forgotten what it knew about cadential structure. We failed. The melomaniac's voice is exhausted, emotionless. Let's go. Return to the docks. It's a long journey, abundant in noise, but lacking in conversation. As you walk, the skull continues to scream. It's the furthest thing possible from music. At last, you make your way back to the ship. The clay men and the whiskey-steeped captain are waiting for you. The melomaniac boards without a word. The journey back to London is a sombre affair, plagued by endless screaming from the melomaniac's quarters. Failure has unbalanced the veiled woman. She takes the skull wherever she goes, muttering to it mindlessly. She repeats the same word over again. Mozart, Mozart, Mozart. Mozart, Mozart, Mozart. Mozart, Mozart, Amadeus Mozart. Even the claymen stay out of her way. Then one night, at the midpoint of your journey, a massive explosion blasts you awake. Investigate at once. The ship lists alarmingly as you get to your feet. In nautical circles, this is known as a bad sign. A cursory investigation uncovers the following. A hole has been blown in the hull, so big it's impossible to repair, and still smoking. The melomaniac has vanished along with the only lifeboat and half the crates of cargo. The whiskey-steeped captain is so drunk he can't be awoken. The ship is rapidly taking on water, despite the claymen's attempts to bail it out. So rapidly, in fact, that your feet are wet. No, wait. Now it's your knees. On the bright side, the melomaniac left Mozart's skull behind. You pocket it. If you make it back to London alive, it might come in useful in resolving all of this. And for once, its screaming seems entirely appropriate. The ship slips beneath the waves at an alarming rate. The claymen have stopped bailing. They stand on the deck, hands linked, swaying as they sing a sombre polythremaic song. And the sea rises up to swallow you all. As the waves lap over your head, and you open your eyes to the sting of salt, you're greeted by a haunting sight. A dozen clay sailors sinking into the depths like the stones they are. Bolt upright, arms folded, making no efforts to swim. Perhaps they hope to walk to shore. Perhaps they simply know their end has come. Spluttering, treading water, you resurface to assess your options. They're slim, admittedly. How can you make it back to London from here? Okay, so we have a couple of options here. Draw in an immense breath and start to swim. Alas for the melomaniac, but your body has adapted to deal with such difficulties. Oh, we got this with the red science at the Gant pole. Good lord, that's another exceptional story. We can dive in search of useful wreckage. You've heard tale of shipwrecked sailors assembling makeshift rafts from the remains of their broken ships. It's worth a shot. We can cling to a nearby barrel and hope for the best. You shall christen it the HMS Better Than Nothing. Fantastic. We could get picked up by an unlikely sailor if I knew the pirate poet. Are those sea shanties on the breeze? If we knew Captain Amelia Whitlock, a ship's bell clamorous in the mist, or if I had a notched bone harpoon, I could hitch a ride on an angler crab. Okay, well, let's use our red science. Drowning is not a concern for one such as you, but the cold, the darkness, the hungry creature of the sea are all another matter. Still, you swim. You swim for days. It feels like aeons. Often the only sound is the incessant screaming of Mozart's skull. You breathe deep and dive for hours at a time, rejoicing in your own strangeness. Eventually, picked up by a passing merchant vessel who can scarcely believe their eyes. You assure them that you're simply a stronger swimmer than most. After that, the journey back to London is relatively tranquil. And that seems like a good place for me to end the first episode of Memories of Mozart. I guess we're going to find out exactly what happened in the next episode, but I'm going to thank you all very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, let me know what you think. Your comments are greatly appreciated. Thank you again to the members of the channel and the coffee supporters. It really does mean the world to me. And as always, see you next time.